YouTube? Welcome back to UniX TCG, and like I promised in the last video, leading into the Treasure Cup, I'm going to start doing a why or why not for most of these decks, because a couple videos back I did discuss how almost every deck has a reason to be played and not played. I think there are some decks that are just inherently at a certain higher echelon, but any deck can win. You could be playing the best red or green deck or purple deck and still lose to blue. Do I think that blue is a little bit less, viable than those other ones? Yeah, I kind of do, but we're going to go over all of these. So first and foremost, I want to say that if you do like the content, make sure you get on there and like the video, hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell, and comment on the video so that it trends and the word kind of gets out there. But we are currently sitting at at this point, I think 3,540, 50 subscribers, and I think that 4,000 is really on its way just as quickly as 3,000 came. So without further ado, let's jump into the deck that we're talking about this time, and then we're going to go through quite a lot. So let's get into it. So, spoiler alert, you can kind of see it in the title. We are talking about Zoro, and this is the why or why not video for Zoro. So we're going to talk about not only the leader, we're going to talk about why it's played, we're going to talk about its downfalls, we're going to go through so many aspects of the deck, and I will try to keep this as clean as possible. So when it comes to the Zoro deck, right? You've got the leader. We've had so many videos about this, I just won't dive into it too much, but you put a Dawn under him, and during your turn, everything gains plus 1k. Now, there are two different red leaders right now that can be workable. I mean, I guess there's 3 people have been experimenting with the Uta, but that one, I think that one's still a little bit ways from being consistent enough. I do know a couple good builds, and maybe I can go find that player if you'd like me to see. I'll show you his build if he'll allow me to. But the point is, the way I see Zoro and Luffy is that Zoro, because he gives everything a 10k or a 1k boost, he's going to be able to make a wider, smaller field a bigger threat. Whereas Luffy, being able to move Arrested Dawn, is going to be able to make you essentially have 1 extra Dawn. Not quite in the way of casting cards, but in the way of utilizing the Dawn Up effect. So essentially, Luffy's going to give you more mileage and more reach in terms of attack power, but Zoro is going to allow you to go wider, and that usually leads to a smaller, faster, well, a board that's lower to the ground, but generally faster. So this guy, run it, gun it, wide boards, and a lot of times you're going to be finding that you're overwhelming your opponent with sheer quantity over quality, and that's not a bad place to be in. Your opponent only has so many cards in hand, and when you have a roll with Zoro, you bulldoze through that. So what makes Zoro a deck that puts it apart from any other deck? The answer is Rush. Rush is the mechanic that is mainly in red, but it can be found in some purple cards too, because purple kind of has an amalgam of all these other effects at the cost of minusing your Dawn. However, when it comes to red, you were looking at a few Rush cards. And the reason why Rush is so good is because and I've touched on this before, I believe, in a game that has Summoning Sickness, Magic the Gathering, this game, a bunch of others that I thought I was going to be able to name right now, but they're just completely blanking me. Most things have to land on the board and then survive until your next turn in order to be able to then affect somebody's life pool or swing at all. And Rush, Haste, anything like this, Blitz in Digimon, those are going to allow you to circumvene that rule. So normally, when your opponent plays their turn and passes, when it's your turn, you can look at their board and essentially count every single attack that is coming your way. What changes that is the Rush mechanic. You can look at your opponent's field of 3 bodies and know that between that and their leader, they could potentially have 4 attacks. But what you can't do is, outside of them searching and showing you that they put it in hand, you can't count the amount of cards they can play from their hand with Rush. You can look at their Dawn and be like, okay, he has 10 Dawn, so he could play 2 Luffys, he could play 2 Zoros, and not another Luffy. You can kind of tell that, but you can't know without that knowledge after seeing them search. So the cards that you have that do the rushing in this deck, you have Zoro. He's a cool stat line. He costs 3. He has 5k stats, which means he's probably going to be swinging for minimum 6k because your leader's going to boost him, and his only effect is that he has Rush. Play him for 3, he has Rush. You also have the big boy, Luffy. Costs 5, comes down for 6, and if he has 2 Dawn under him, he's going to be able to bypass blockers. This is a very, very important card, and I will get back to it a little later. And then lastly, you don't see this as much in the Zoro decks, but he is in and out of lists. You have Sanji. This guy costs 2, 4K. You put 2 Dawn under him, making him a 6K, and he's going to gain Rush from the 2 Dawn under him. So basically, he's a 4-drop, and if you really think about it, it's kind of interesting because none of these guys with Rush have a counter value, but you essentially have a 3K or 3-drop 5K, which will likely be 6. You have a 4-drop 6K, cool, which will likely be 7 if you're playing him late game, and then you have a 5-drop 6K, which will likely be 7 when he swings. So when you think about it like that, right? Sanji and Luffy are kind of actually very similar. The only difference is Sanji's likely going to die next turn. There is nothing stopping an opponent from just putting a single Dawn on their leader and swinging and forcing you to drop a 2K counter if you want to save him. And that's like, actually, no, 2K and a 3K, or 2K and a 1K. So basically, the only difference is Sanji's most certainly dying next turn. Luffy, you might be able to block and guard him a little bit. So that is something to note. But with those 3 cards, you really do change up the battle math, and that is something you really can't ignore. That's the best part about the deck. You can play a game where you're setting up your cards accordingly, but anytime that you have the spare Dawn, you get to play the Rush card and you get to change up the battle math, and that's when your opponent's not ready for it. Swing with your leader. Swing with the 2 bodies you have on board. Okay, well, they've exhausted some of their counters for the turn. They've taken the damage they want to take. Okay, bam, I just played a Rush card too. Swing one more time for that extra damage. And that happens 3 times, and guess what? That last extra damage is probably your opponent's life being reduced from 0 to game-winning state. Now, you have your Rush cards, but what holds the deck together? Well, you have 2 cards, okay? 2 cards, and this is going to be one of the downsides of the deck. You have so many Rush cards, but your deck, as a downside, in red, you don't see additional cards often. There's no hard plus in red. Everything costs a card. Whether you were playing a Nami for 1 to search top 5 and you make a body, but you search top 5 for a Straw Hat card, or you're playing Sabaody and you're paying 1, not gaining a body, but you are searching another Straw Hat card, and this card can search Nami. Nami can't search Nami, and this card can't search events, but this card can search Nami. So it's like you have pluses and minuses. This is obviously the more popular one because it makes a body and then you can search, but this also works and you can get this hit from life. And I'm telling you, it feels awful when you swing into your opponent's life and a Sabaody flips over and they either search for a card to better defend themselves or they search for a card to better beat you into the ground next turn. So it can get a little rough. Hoping that they don't have another Rush for next turn, you hit a life and it's Sabaody and they just pick up a Rush and you're like, all right. So there are things like that. But the fact of the matter is this deck does not plus. There's no Bonnie that you can get incremental advantage over the course of the game. It's not like Dofi that's going to draw for turn but also play from its hand and or play from the top of its deck. It's not like Kaido that actually has cards that just straight up draw 2, trash 1 to make a body. This deck is 1-for-1ing for all of its advantage. So that means that you have to be very, very, very methodical about how you play cards. Playing a board into a board that can counter crack your board is potentially the way to lose the game, because once you lose those 3 cards on board, you have to play 3 more cards on board. And there's no way to go plus on your hand. Those cards are gone forever. So that is that. I've also found that playing against red decks, when you stall them off their life, their hand can dwindle very well. If you have a very defensive setup and you start picking off their board and not dying, you essentially really bottom up their hand really quick. But yeah, these are the only 2 cards that actually fetch other cards, and they don't plus, they 1-for-1. So just remember that when you're playing red, you do have that rush power, but you also are sacrificing a whole lot of, you don't have deck thinning, you don't have any plussing, and so you have to make sure that every move counts. There are no wasted moves that should be made in red decks. Any deck really, but red just get a little more. Now, when it comes to rush, red also has a pretty good destruction suite. While it's not as, versatile as Kaido's, they have some pretty good cards. And those cards come in the form of Nico Robin. Nico Robin is able to come down. She's a 4K body for 3. That's wonderful. But when there's a Dawn underneath her and she swings, you can blow up something with 3K power or less. This is going to get blockers out of the way. This is going to get small little weenies out of the way as well. It's going to be pretty good. This is a very good card, and having this on board for too long will ruin the game for another player, because generally outside of purple, you're going to be getting rid of a bunch of cards they would like to keep on the field between you and their life. And then we're going to come into some more play with her soon enough. But we're also going to then talk about Jet Pistol, the de facto almost best destruction card in the game. It can be popped off of life, it can be played from hand, but you're killing something with 6k power or less. Now this is going to be a huge factor for later. We're going to jump directly back into both of these cards, but between these two cards, you basically have your Lobby killer and your mid-range killer. And then with the help of some other cards, you really start shifting that tempo as well. But these are going to be great. You're getting rid of small blockers, you're getting rid of big blockers. There's pretty much just tearing through your opponent's board to make sure that they can't mount an offense behind that, right? So next, we're going to talk about the footsie game before that. So we've talked about your rushers, the main thing that sets this deck apart. We've shown you about the search, we've shown you about some of the destruction. Well, now we're going to talk about the kind of in-betweeners, okay? The in-betweeners. What we got here is that because Zoro's ability of boosting everything by 1k when he has a Dawn under him, like I said, you can go small to the ground, but super wide as well. And what that's going to allow you to do is utilize cards like Sunny, which is a 1-drop 3k, and then cards like Vivi, which are 2-drop 4ks. Now, lots of people have a lot of things to say about these. Some people will play both. Lots of people are like, it's one or the other. You're playing the 1-drops or you're playing the 2-drops. Now, I personally feel that the 2-drops are better, but that's just me. It's personal preference. The way I look at it, though, is it's almost like paying a bigger down payment, but not having to pay as big monthly payments. If you guys are at the point where you have your car payment, or you even put down a payment on a condo or a home, you guys know what I'm talking about. The bigger your down payment, generally the less you have to pay per month on these things. And that is actually exactly how I view these. With the Sunny, you're going to pay 1 for it, yes. And then when you put a Dawn under Zoro, you're going to put another Dawn under him, and you're going to swing. That is correct. But every turn that you play this, or that you want to swing with this, you're going to have to put a Dawn under just for him to hit 5k, plus the Dawn under your leader, which you're going to do anyway. The other difference is that this guy can get swung on by a 5k, and you cannot protect it without going uber neg in hand to protect something that they can just turn another card at again. So you pay less for this up front, but you're paying more for it every single turn to make it effective. Whereas with this one, you're paying 1 more for it the turn you play it, but it will always be able to swing for neutral against the leader just by having the Dawn that you were going to put under your Zoro always under it. Then on top of that, if your opponent swings on it for a just 5k neutral, their leader just goes through it. If you so choose, you can choose to drop a 2k to protect this, because it'll go up to 6 and block the 5. So while this one is more cost efficient the turn you play it, this is more cost efficient every other turn after you play it. So that's kind of how I feel. Either way though, you were getting a lot of swings, and if you do decide to play both, you can play quite a few cards that just are going to pressure your opponent's life before you even have to touch your rush. Turn 1, a Sunny. Turn 2, a Vivi. Well, it's actually turn 1, a Sunny, right? Turn 2, a Vivi. Don't swing with them. Turn 3, you're going to have all this Dawn. You're going to be able to put a Dawn under Sunny, a Dawn under your leader, and you're going to be able to swing once for 5k, once for 5k, once for 6k with your leader, and you still have room to play a rusher. So you have things like that. But the point is, you really have to decide how your deck is going to be formed, because if you're playing both the 1s and the 2s, you're going to have to figure out the space for that. So, plan accordingly. Next, we're going to talk about bombs. The deck has great early game, a pretty strong mid game with the Luffys and the Zoros and the leader swings being big. But once the game gets further into the late game, you're going to need some closing power. And the closing power doubles as both offense and defense. Because while these cards can beat your opponent into the ground, what they're also going to do is help deter your opponent from playing things like 8-Drop Kid, or thinking they can just play 8-Drop Kid and be forever established. So the first one on the docket is Shanks. This guy is just freaking amazing. This artwork, I think, is the best artwork out of all of them, even though the manga Shanks is super expensive. But hey, that's why I chucked mine immediately. But this guy has Rush, he's a 9-drop, and his ability is essentially Conqueror's Hockey. He cannot be blocked with anything with 2k power or less. If your power isn't high enough, you can't even look at this dude. It's literally Conqueror's Hockey, because Bandai loves flavor. But the thing here is, he's going to come down, and lots of times you won't even swing with him. He is too big to be destroyed by like any effect but a 10-drop Kaido. And if your opponent taps him with Straw Sword, that takes 2 energy if they're playing green, and they still have to put 8 on something and swing on him. And he's a 10k. If they put 8 on their leader and swing, I'm sure 2 2ks in a red deck, not hard to find. You will protect this guy. It's very dangerous to do that on him. So he comes down and he's just going to stay. But when your opponent starts trying to establish things like 8-drop Kid, you just have to get rid of their blockers, and this guy is almost assuredly going to destroy it. Actually, if they have a Law and a Killer, you just need to get rid of the Law. Jet Pistol the Law, put all your Dawn on this guy, swing in, that kid is gone. So these cards mostly sit here and just threaten clearing on the board, but then the turn that you know you're going in for the kill, they can all turn sideways. Wonderful. Besides that, things that you see less often, but they're still making their rounds, are the vanillas from the film set. This is Yasop and Ben Beckman. Basically, they're vanillas, but they're going to come down for 6 and 7 for 8 and 9k bodies and threaten the same thing. While they don't have the rush that Shanks does, but even though he has rush, you're not swinging with him most of the time you put him out. So these kind of do the same thing. They come out for cheaper, and they have bodies that are almost as big. So when it comes to putting these out, you just slam them down, you wait, and when your opponent plays that 8-drop Kid, you get rid of the blockers, you Dawn these guys up, you swing hard on them, and they provide those attacks. So this is what these guys are for. Providing big bodies that can threaten setup walls and then threaten life when there are no setup walls in the way. Now, moving past that, you may wonder what I was coming back to when it comes to the destruction, right? This red color also has the ability to minus power. We've got a lot of cards to do it. So the most common card you're going to see in every red deck, because it is both a 2k counter as well as a minus 2k, is Otama. Otama is good. She comes down for 1 and she can minus something for 2k. And what this means is she combos excellently with a couple cards. You have Jet Pistol. This is one of the most detrimental combos to your opponents in the game, because you will Jet Pistol their 8k to 6k, and then you will you will Otama their 8k to 6k, and then you will Jet Pistol their 6k, now 6k threat off the board. Huge. At the same time, you can also use that same logic with Nico Robin. If you hit them with an Otama, drop something down from 5k to 3k, and then you swing with your Nico, like you're gonna go hard. Robin is going to literally just pop something that was 5k, and that's a huge W. Now, the other things that kind of fit into this realm that you're gonna see, you have cards like Trafalgar Law. He is a 4-cost 5k body that does the same thing as Otama, and he's not a 2k counter, so you don't have to waste a 2k counter from him. I personally think that in a lot of builds, this guy's a little too fat for Zoro, and I like him a lot better in Luffy. However, that is not to say that this guy can't be in Zoro. He is an excellent card. It just depends on where you want to do, because in a deck that doesn't see a lot of cards like Red, you have to figure out what your focus is. If your focus is mid-range, you might want to pick up Luffy, but you want to focus your deck around that strong point of the game. If your focus is early game pressure with maybe a couple like Shanks's to help burst in the late game if you need to, you don't really want to play a lot of mid-range cards, because they're going to clog up your early game aggression. So pick and choose. Another card, Gordon. I actually like this guy a lot. He doesn't have a counter cost, and that's kind of rough, but you play him for 1, you put him at the bottom of the deck, and you minus something, okay? You minus something for 3k. This allows your Jet Pistol to kill 9k threats, which is huge. And then also, like, Mihawks can get killed by that. But it also allows your Robins to hit 6k threats like Laws, and that's huge too. So, yeah, another one. Now, next you have my least favorite of them, but this is Round Table. And Round Table is going to be able to bring something down to 10 by 10k. And in this game, 0 is not the threshold. If something goes past 0, it goes into the negatives, and even if they Dawn it up, or even if they counter up, they have to start from the negative value and go up. But the issue is, this is a 4-cost card, and you still have to swing on it. So like, it's like if you Round Table a Kid, but they have 2 blockers, what'd you do that turn? You feel me? You feel me? But that's my personal feeling Round Table. Also, it's a Supernova / Beautiful Pirates card, so you cannot search this off of anything. You have to hard draw this card and then it has to be in conjunction with a field already or a jet pistol in hand. So that's rough for me. Now moving on to terms of defense. Defense, we got a lot. We got Chopper, and Chopper is just your one-cost blocker. Some people don't play him at all. I still like teching him because there's a few things I think that Chopper does in every matchup. In the red matchup, you trade Choppers for, you know, strong attacks before you start getting to things like Luffy or Diablo Jambe packed swings. You also were able to use him in blue to stop some of the early Dofi swings, because once Dofi gets into its mid and late game, you aren't really blocking lots of its attacks if they're just too big. Same thing with Kaido. You use this early game because in the late game, Kaido's blowing up your blockers and swinging with things too fat to counter over, so you need to make sure your health is high before they get to that stride so you can finish them off with a healthy life total. And then in green, keeping your life up is still good as well, especially in the mid game when they start pushing, because once you're at 1 life and no blockers, Law just destroys you. Or sorry, Law. Kid destroys you with its Alpha Omega swing, pretty much. Now, the other things you got Guard Point. This is like from the starter deck, but it kind of fell off a little bit. Guard Point hits you for what, 1k, and then it does 3k. No, one of your leader characters gains 3k for the battle as a counter, but the trigger gains 1k for the turn. It's pretty good, but it changes effects very much so depending on how you get it. And 3k for the battle is a pretty cool change, but you've got some other things in here. Radical Beam is kind of seen as a lot more superior. It's only going to give you 2k power, but if you have 2 or less life, it's additional 2k power. So 1 for 4k if you're already at a low life is insane. And then if you get it killed from life, it has the same thing as Guard Point, which is 1k for the turn. So that's pretty cool. And then this one, it's a lot easier to see coming because you have to leave up 2, but Red Hawk is very, very strong. Plus 4k on the defense, blow up something with 2k or less power. And what that's actually 4k or less power. And what that's going to do is get rid of small blockers that you don't want on your opponent's board next turn. That's going to get rid of Bonnies and Momonosuke's. That's going to get rid of a whole lot of things. So as for this deck, this puts in a lot of work. And then lastly, what we have is Diablo Jambe. That's the utility. Diablo Jambe, you're going to be able to choose a Straw Hat. And when you choose a Straw Hat, you're going to be able to make it unblockable for the turn. This can be your leader, or a battle, or a character. So there are going to be turns where your opponent has a completely huge setup with some blockers, and you can just Diablo Jambe on your leader for 1. Put 9 Dawn under that dude, and then swing in for 14, and just know your opponent has to combo from 5k to 14. It's probably not happening. But that's also a cool thing about the Kid. If they put the 8-drop Kid up on green and you just Diablo Jambe something and you swing hard on it, you're probably killing the Kid. As long as the value gets up high enough, you're probably killing the Kid. So that is pretty much that. And then on top of that, I guess some of the last points I want to hit is that your matchups are pretty even across the board because no other deck really operates in the same space that Red does unless you're the Mirror. You're really going to be able to get a lot of damage in while decks are still trying to get into their stride, and then it's your job to figure out how to close out that last bit of damage while your opponent is seemingly going to stabilize. That's the hardest part about Red. And then I had a comment earlier, I can't remember the name that it was, but comment was asking, why do people play Luffy but not swing with them, or play Shanks and not swing with them? And it's because your Dawn management is one of the most crucial parts of the game. If you have 10 Dawn and you play a Luffy, you only have 5 Dawn left over. If you put 2 Dawn under him to make him unblockable, you only have 3 Dawn left over. Meaning that Luffy can only get to a maximum of 10k? And that, playing for 5, put 5 under him, 11k. He can only get to a max of 11k. Whether you put the other 5 Dawn underneath him after you play him, or you put 4 Dawn underneath him and then put 1 under Zoro, he's only hitting 11k. But if you play that same Luffy and then you don't swing with him, the following turn you could put 8 Dawn under him and have him be a 14k that can't be blockable. And that's likely going to nuke whatever Kid is on the other side of the board rested through its blockers. So, with that being said, that is my why or why not with Red Zoro. I just wanted to show you all the assets of the deck. You play him because he is unpredictable in the amount of pressure he can put on at any given turn as long as your hand is healthy. And the reasons why you wouldn't want to play him, I will say, because we got to hit the cons too. We'll cons and then we'll go further into there. Your deck doesn't gain any cards, like I said, and it's very linear. Even if they can't predict your attacks, generally there's only so many cards in set 1 you can play, but red is so much harder to tech in, because playing tech cards in red takes away from what it's good at completely. Doesn't add like another layer, it makes it generally slower or less consistent. So when you play tech cards in red, you take away from the potency of the deck, which means that most games people are going to know what's coming, and even if they can't counter attacks, they're going to know generally what should be coming. Try to prepare for it. Try to keep that life total healthy, because that Zoro, that Luffy, that Sanji could be coming at any turn. Save certain things because they know that Ben Beckman or that Yasop could be dropping and waiting in the waiting the rafters, like things like that. So we have a linear deck that doesn't see a lot of cards. And when you don't see any extra cards, that means your opponent can wear you down. Against a lot of Zoro decks, I don't even like touching your life until I think my board is good enough or in a position where I can start pushing you. In other decks cases, like Kaido and green, I will leave your life where it is until I feel like I'm set up. In blue, I feel like it's more of a tempo match, same with red versus red, so it plays a little differently. But yeah, because you don't accrue a lot of cards, if people don't touch your life, you could find yourself sitting at a very, very, very small hand size very, very, very soon, and that becomes very, very, very rough. So, with that being said, this has been a little bit of a longer video. If you want to play red, know that you will get under people's strategies, but also know that as much as people want to say aggro go burr, once you get to a higher level of play, red is not very forgiving, because you make 2 misplays and you're out 3 to 4 cards in your hand, and you will never get those cards back. Meanwhile, the other decks are building better, bigger boards than you in the mid to late game, and it will overcome you. So I hope you guys like this video. I hope everybody learned something, and I will move on to the next deck after this. Actually, just leave it in the comments. Leave it in the comments which deck you think I should go to next, and we will work on it from there. So thank you guys, and I will see you next time. Later.